Hello, this is Gene. I think we need to talk about what's going on in the world right now, specifically in the Ukraine. I've been listening to a lot of quote unquote pundits in the last week or so talking about it, and of course, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I didn't know a whole lot about it. I did know that there was some hostilities about 7 or 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, in the eastern parts of Ukraine, and basically ethnic Russians were being somewhat targeted by the Ukrainian government. Their military was shelling their homes and stuff, and so there's been kind of like a civil war going in Ukraine for a while now. Those two or three regions that have basically been what's the word I'm looking for, recognized by Russia as being sovereign. Um, I don't know the regions in the Ukraine that are basically, they look at them as a Russian area. And so I looked at that. I've been reading and looking at different media people. Obviously, in the West, it's very difficult because they usually have the same talking points, whether you're on the right or left when it comes to this thing. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just the levels, what exactly the United States or the West is going to do. But they're in lockstep with each other. Um, so I started watching some of the Russian type of stuff and what they're talking about, and I found out more about what was going on in those regions, how the Ukrainian government had been killing, basically genociding the people there because they didn't conform. They wanted to keep speaking Russian. I guess 2013 they came out and said that the national language is going to be Ukrainian. That you can't, everywhere you go, it's going to be Ukrainian. It's not going to be Russian. They had problems with it, so they basically said, no, we're going to do what we're going to do. And apparently, the Ukrainian government didn't want to go that way. They wanted them to be in lockstep with the government. There's this idea that the Ukrainian government is somehow a democracy. Um, it's not. It was the current president was basically put in by the West. Um, there was a government before that was more favorable to Russia, and really, when you really look at everything, you try to take all the spin and the bias, and saying, and so just not always believing that Russian is the bad guy, and the people in the West are the good guys. When you realize it's basically all shades of gray, that there is no good or bad people in this. Obviously, war is bad. Nobody is going to support war. But if when they've tried many times to say, "Hey, this is what we need to do," basically what Russia wants, and I don't think we would have even been here if we didn't kind of like encouraging the Ukraine to be part of NATO um, for decades, at least a decade. Uh, Putin has said that if Ukraine becomes part of NATO, there'll be issues about it. There'll be replications of it. And our vice president said it before the war, 2 or 3 days before the war started happening, or the invasion, or what do you want to call it? If you actually go on RT, which is a Russian media service, which is obviously funded by the Russian government, and people think that we don't have that here in this country. We do, and certainly the BBC is also somewhat a government agency that has its own media out things. But anyway, CBC in Canada as well. Um, so, oh, I forgot what I was going to talk about. Anyway, it was more about uh, Putin had been saying for if you do this and to become part of NATO, there's going to be hell to pay, basically. Um, and then our vice president, for some reason, was the person who had to come to Europe and talk about this stuff. And she basically said, I encourage the Ukrainians government to look at the idea of being part of NATO. And you've noticed the first week of the war, uh, the president of Ukraine continually talks about being part of the EU or in NATO. Um, so it's this what they want is this is what they want. NATO wants to have. they want to be right there on the borders of Russia, and Russia needs that. In their mind, they want that buffer between Europe and Russia. So Ukraine has been that buffer, and they are never going to allow NATO to have a foothold there. So the last 10 days, especially the last 4 or 5 days, we've been hearing different ways that the West is going to try to counteract what's going on in Ukraine right now, using Poland to help with air support. It'll be Ukrainian bombers, Ukrainian pilots using Polish or NATO type planes to come into Ukraine. And I guess what the idea is that they want to blow up that convoy that's outside of Kiev right now. I don't think that'll be a good thing to do. I don't want to be somebody it's one of those things. If you're going to be in war, you can't do it haphazard. When the president comes on today or last day, it was today at some time, I think, and he says we did all these great sanctions against Russia, and he's proud that the ruble has lost half of its value, and he thinks that's a good thing. It's going to alienate the Russian people against the West. There are a lot of people in Russia who are actually against this war, and I don't think sanctions is the way to go when it comes to this. When you're taking the vast populace of Russian people and taking away their economy, they're going to end up believing what Putin tells us about them, about the West. Although some of what he says is absolutely true. We've been involved with shit we never should be in. We shouldn't be involved with this either. But of course we are, because NATO doesn't take care of themselves, so we have to always come in and help. I'm not talking about World War II or World War I. I know we came late in the fight, and a lot of people in the United States try to take credit for that. I'm not one of those people. I understand what the history was, but really in NATO we pretty much pay for everything. Anyway, so we gotta understand that there's issues going on here. It's just not as black and white as our media portrays. And it's funny to me that there are people on the right that just now believe everything the media says, when a lot of people on the right, some independent people, had questions about a lot of things that's happened the last 2 or 3 years. COVID, the election, anything that we all of a sudden we doubt that we can't really trust our media. But when it comes to this, we believe it. We've lionized the president of Zelensky when he I'm not going to say what he is, but he's a Zionist. There are a lot of people that are on that. They necessarily want something to happen here, and meanwhile, the United States and Israel and other people are involved with other wars around the world, and nobody gives a shit about it. Now, of course, I heard things on RT yesterday saying that people are upset because Poland and a lot of European countries are taking in Ukrainians, and they're only taking them in there because they happen to be white. Whereas they hemmed and hawed, especially Poland and Hungary. They didn't want anybody from Syria and Africa to come in their country. And they think that that's the same thing, that these are the same migrants or refugees from war-torn areas. I'm just thinking Germany took, 2 million in? I think it's not a good example. I think the Poland and Hungary, those people can do whatever they want to do in their countries. When it comes to who they allow in, it is a difference that they are the next country right next to the Ukraine. So it's not like when Syria was up to Turkey, and then from Turkey you come into Europe, or Africa, you had to go on boats and cross the thing. That's a little different than you're walking across the border and you're in Poland. So, and that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to have safe haven in the next type of countries until you go back and rebuild your country. And I will say that a lot of the are staying back and actually defending their country. Or apparently, again, this is Western sources. A lot of people in Africa, they leave their country. They don't defend their country. Syria, they don't defend their country. They just come in this country. They normally are only they are aged. These are young men that are coming into Europe, and on average, they do bad things compared to the natives there, and they've been involved with stuff that were shocking and terrorist activities. And I don't think that people from the Ukraine will have that, although there are Ukrainians that are Muslims. Not that Muslims are all terrorists, but it's not part of the not of the realm of a possibility. And then what we also been hearing these things about neo-Nazis and stuff, and how the Ukrainian government has basically been using these as, especially in the eastern part of Russia, or eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass and all those areas. They've been, supporting these people as they go and try to get those people out of those areas, so they'll be part of the Ukrainian, whatever that government's going to be. And people say, well, it can't be true because the Zelensky is a Jew. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with anything. People that are in power, they're corrupt people that are in power. And let me tell you something: the Ukrainian government is corrupt. I mean, remember what Biden said? He basically said you're not going to get your funding until you do this to this prosecutor, and they allowed it, and they got their funding. And people don't think there was anything wrong with that. They think that that's fine when that's clearly, I don't know what the word is. If he was in office at that point, well, he was. Was he vice president when that happened? I don't even remember. But there are so many things that he's done, and American businessmen have done in Ukraine to take billions of dollars out of their economy. Anyway, I just think that people need to look at all sources and be very, very skeptical on the Western sources, and also what you get, the small amount of stuff that you get from Russia. Now, I watch an Indian news channel on YouTube. Unfortunately, as crazy as this is, because YouTube always gets rid of everything, they have not shut down, in the United States, it's not shut down RT, so I can watch RT. And the Indian one is, they've abstained in the UN because what's happening there, that Indian people are not being treated as well as the Ukrainian people. And so they're not 100% against Russia at this point. They've abstained, but they haven't. Obviously, they don't want war. Nobody wants war. And obviously, the people that actually support Russia are on their side as well. The satellite countries like Cuba and stuff. So I watch that, and then I watch RT. The only thing with RT is that they continually show this documentary about Donbass and the other region over there. And I've seen it 1,000 times. It's not really, it's basically propaganda, but we do it here as well. We continually do this do our news cycle on, especially online and stuff. It's right away, and they want to show the same thing, and they show the same buildings being blown up. And it's all horrible to see, because there are people, probably thousands of people have died from this. But this is something that was always going to happen. And there was an issue, like I said before this, there was a civil war really going on in the Ukraine. It's really Kiev east going toward Russia is there's some issues right there, and that's always going to happen. It's a fairly new country, sovereign country, and these are basically ethnic Russians. These are people closer to Moscow than they are. They almost all speak Russian. It's very similar. And it was interesting when this all started. And of course, as soon as it started, they said that Putin was Hitler. And there was a picture of him on the Time or something like that, and they showed Putin, and in the middle of it, they showed, Hitler's stash. It's like, okay. But it's very similar what they did in Poland. There was a Neftik German area, and Hitler asked many, many times that he wanted to get his people out of there because they were being killed by the Polish people, Polish army. And eventually, after having several sit-downs with the Poland government, and he couldn't do it, he went in. And as soon as he went in, that's when England followed along their treaty and declared war on Germany. Um, there's so much that's very similar to me as when you look at the parallels, because it's the same thing. Now, both of them could be to cover for Hitler and for Putin. Hey, I want to do this because this is more of a humanitarian thing. I want to get my guys out of there. And we won't know because he did, as far as I can remember, he didn't go through Poland and just start killing everybody to get to that region. I think he went around where it was. You'd have to see on the map where it was to try to get people out of there. And once he did it, you know, World War II was declared, or just war was taken declared. And once then the treaties enforced, and we got what we got. So this is the same thing, but it's different. And I was like, I would have been okay if Putin went in and said, we're gonna annex these areas and claim as Russian, and then get to get into a talk or something like that. There was like a treaty of Minsk, I think it was, and the Ukrainians didn't follow it. I like what I'm trying to tell you is that there's a lot of corruption on both sides, and Putin is he's resolute, and when he said something, people probably should listen to him. Whereas Ukrainians are trying to figure out what they actually are as far as their government, and they're in a wrong. It's a good position for them, and it's a bad position for them because they got the West trying to shield Russia from Europe. Russia can't do anything on the ground in Europe. They will be destroyed if they try to come into Poland. I mean, it'd be done with them. All his army would be destroyed. Now, obviously, he does have his card that he has nuclear stuff. Personally, I don't think he would ever use it, but you never know. You never know. So, I still think it's a bad thing, and the reason why I think that that he has not forced that convoy to go into Kiev yet is because I think he wants something to happen diplomatically. What I think he really wants is he wants Zelensky out of there and have a country or a government that's more favorable to Russia. And what I mean by favorable to Russia, that they won't join NATO, that they realize where they are geographically to Russia, that how important that they are. I don't think he wants to take back all of Ukraine under. Again, this is my opinion. Under the Russian thing, like the old Soviet Union. I think this is more of, you guys were going to say you were not going to keep pushing east and east and east, and they keep pushing west or east. And the Russians are not. The Russians are very, very resolute when it comes to this, and he is as well. You know, he says if Russia can't be free, then the rest of the world will not be free. And he has the nuclear armament to make it really, very bad in the rest of the world. We have fucked this up, the United States especially, sending the vice president, who is stupid, regardless of gender or color or race or whatever. She is not serious when it comes to this. It's horrible that what she said over there, and how and Biden looks weak. But again, I don't want war. I don't want us to go in and say, because this is fighting for democracy. This is not what this is. It started off with a civil war. Russia seeing the West, the NATO and the West, getting closer and closer to his borders. I mean, it's a very similar thing. If all of a sudden the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, had a huge deal with Mexico, and then they allowed like their let's say 100,000 Chinese servicemen out there just learning near the borders, just training and training right there. What would you do here? I'm not saying we go in and take off Russia or Mexico, but we would be very upset about it. We wouldn't want them to be that close. And it happened with Cuba. So it's it's like what is okay for the West and what's not okay for Russia. And I don't give a shit that they somewhat look like Europeans. I mean, that isn't the point here. You can't sit there and just think they can get away with this, you know. And it just it's weird when both sides are somewhat agreeing. It's kind of like whenever the Israeli prime minister goes to Congress, they always get a standing ovation. The shit that Israel is doing right now that nobody gives a shit about, Saudi Arabia is doing right that nobody's giving a shit about. I don't know. I mean, this idea with these sanctions are not just going to destroy the Russian people and their economy. It's going to impact us tremendously in this country. I mean, gas is $4 here. I had this conversation years ago. I said, no, the president, I think this was under Obama when I was radicalized leftist and I didn't even know I was. And I was like, oh, Obama has no real impact on what happens with the gas. It's a capitalist thing, you know. It's based on supply and demand and all that shit. Because back under his reign, we were at $4 as well. And then when you start looking into it and you realize really what this is, and that just 18 months ago we were, independent when it comes to this. But from what I read right now, it's very possible, and where I live, by the end of this month, it might be $6. In California, it might be $8 or $9, and that just trickles down to everything else. Is the government going to give us a stimulus for that? I mean, but then they say that we should just go get it from Saudi Arabia or Iran. I'm like, okay. How about we just, well, you know, it's a different video. There's really no common sense that's going on right now. But I just want you guys to, and I know I'm talking way too much. The first 3 or 4 minutes of this would have been enough. But it's really, if you come across this this channel, this video, there's just more than what Fox is telling you, that MSNBC is telling you, or CNN. There are a lot of other people who look at this. It's just not that cut and dry. It never really is when it comes to war. When you really look at everything. There's another video for that. I'm not going to go into the parallels between this and World War II and World War I. It's like we've been here before. There's a possibility we could do it again. I still don't think we're stupid enough, both in the Russians or us, to actually do anything nuclear with this. But it doesn't mean that hundreds of thousands of people wouldn't die, because they will. If Poland supports a no-fly zone, what do you think Russia's going to do if these jets are coming out of Polish airfields and then coming in there and they're shooting Russian people or Russian troops? They're going to fire to where they come from, and then that's a shooting war, and then NATO will get involved, and here we go. It's going to be World War III in the European theater, and then what will China do? Because China needs the oil from Russia. I mean, there are so many scenarios, you know, as a political person that I am, it's so quickly that this can happen. And 10 days ago, I said this would have never happened. I said he's going to do what he's going to do. They're going to take Ukraine, and they're going to probably input their own person there, like we've tried to do. I mean, it's like we've done that all over the Middle East. We tried to do it in Yugoslavia. I mean, come on. It's the same shit, but somehow we're okay with it. Anyway, let me know what you think about this situation. and we could talk about it in the comments. Just because I think there's a different story here doesn't mean that I am pro-Putin. Obviously, I served for 24 years, but I just don't. Look, before I leave, because I just remembered this, they keep talking about the cyber attacking that the Russians are trying to do, and they can't do it in Ukraine or something. They don't know how to do it. And all these quote-unquote experts talking on these shows know nothing about cyber attack. I know about it. I worked in it. If Russia wanted to shut down everything in Ukraine, they could. And they have enough of the technology from their friends, the Chinese, they could do a lot to us as well. Not that saying that we shouldn't sit there and say, oh my God, don't do it to us. But I'm just telling you, they can. And I don't think that's what he really wants to do. Again, I'm not Putin. I think he just wants a favorable government there in Ukraine, have a buffer between the West and him, and go on with his life and let his Russian people have their own life, you know. But who knows? Maybe he's at that point that he wants to go down as a that type of thing, like a Hitler thing or whatever. Anyway, we'll talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye.